Okay, welcome to our study of Mishnayot, Masechet Berachot. We're in Perek He, chapter 5, Mishnah He, Mishnah 5. The final Mishnah of this chapter talks about a Hazan who makes an error in the Tefillah. Hamitpalel v'ta'ah, a person who is praying and made an error, Siman Ra'lo. That's a bad sign for him. That his Tefillah did not go the way. It shows that there's a block between him and Hashem if he made a mistake. Also, he's not concentrating in his Tefillah, which is also not a good thing. V'im shaliach tzibur, if the Hazan makes a mistake and he's on behalf of the whole Kahal, siman ra' l'shulhav. It's not only a bad omen for him, but it's also a bad omen for all of the people who he's representing. Because we have a klal, a rule, that a shaliach of a person, an agent of a person, is acting on his behalf, is like himself. So if the Hazan makes an error and he's acting as an agent on behalf of the entire Kahal, it's as if the whole Kahal made a mistake, and therefore all of us need to introspect and reflect that maybe we're doing something wrong, and that's why our tefillot are not coming out properly. We're making errors because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is blocking them. He doesn't want them, and therefore introspection and teshubah are necessary. Amru alav al Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. The Mishnah now brings a story related to this idea about errors in tefillah and the siman, the sign that it is, the omen that it is. Story of the famed Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who was a tremendous hacham, but more, he was incredibly devoted to Hashem, and many miracles are recorded on his behalf. They tell about him, Shehaya mitpalel al hacholim. He used to pray on behalf of those who were sick. Ve'omer, and after he prayed, he would say, Zeh hai ve'zeh met. This one will live, this one will die. He knew immediately following his tefillah what was going to happen with the sick person. Some of the commentaries here say that he didn't actually say that out loud. That would be a little bit crass, right? Not only that, we have a concept, brit kruta l'sfatayim, that a person should not utter and put into the world certain ideas like that. This person will die, this person will live, because then it's a foregone conclusion that it will happen once he puts it out there. So it means that he sort of reacted in a certain way where people knew from his facial expressions or from the way he was acting out that he knew something bad or something good was going to happen. And on that, they asked him, Amrulo, the people would come over to him and say, Minayin ata yodeya? How do you know that this one's going to live and this one's going to die? Amar lahem, he said to them, Im shegura tefilati befi. If my prayer is fluent in my mouth, in other words, when I pray, the words and the ideas and the concentration all come out smooth, Yodea ani shehu mikubal. I know that's a siman to me, an omen to me, that Hashem has accepted my prayers because he wants them, and therefore the person's going to live. Ve'im lav. But if I fumble, if I stumble, if the concentration is not there, if I'm not on that highest level, I know that Hashem is purposely blocking me from being able to conduct my best prayer because he wants the person to die. I know that this shehu metoraf, that he is ripped up. Now, there's two explanations of what it means that he is ripped up. The he could mean the person who's sick, or the he could be the tefillah, that the tefillah has been ripped up before Hashem, and if his tefillah is ripped up before Hashem, then no tefillah is going to penetrate to potentially have the person recover from that illness. The word mitoraf comes from, like we say, tarof toraf Yosef. When Yaakov was told about Yosef's disappearance, he said, my son has been torn apart by animals. So tarof toraf means I know that either the prayer or the person has been ripped apart and is not accepted. So we see that certain people like Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa have such a deep relationship with Hashem that the nature of their prayer can tell them a lot about whether their prayers have been accepted or not. And therefore a person has to pray from a sidur, study the prayers, know them, pray with concentration, and make sure that when there's additions to the prayer, that they do everything to maintain their focus and not get distracted so they don't omit and make mistakes in the prayer. If you make mistakes in the prayer too often, it's a sign that a person's prayers are not on the level where they need to be, and the person has to do some reflection and introspection. Let's go to the next Mishnah. We now move into chapter 6, Perek Vav, Mishnah Aleph. This is the Mishnah, the Perek which deals with the laws of Berachot. Ketzad mevarechin al haperot. And really, this is what the Masechet should have been totally about, right? This is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted to get to, but in order to get to it, he had to focus first on Shema and Amidah and other things of Berachot nature. How does one, what is the language with which one makes berachot on different fruits? Al perot ha'ilan, on fruits of the tree. Omer bore pri ha'etz. He says, creator of the fruit of the tree. The beracha is Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. That goes without saying. Every beracha starts with that opening. Boreh peri ha'etz, the creator, excuse me, of the fruit of the tree. And you put, it's proper for a person to pause after boreh. Boreh, he created, peri ha'etz. Peri ha'etz means the fruit of the tree goes together. That's why there's also a dagesh, a dot in the peh. Boreh, peri ha'etz, because there's a pause after the word boreh, so the aleph does not cause the peh to lose its dagesh. Others read it boreh feri ha'etz or boreh feri ha'gefen, and they read it as one thing. But I think Chacham Ovadia Yosef alav shalom, his proper reading was boreh peri ha'etz. Slight pause after the word boreh. Val perot ha'aretz omer, sorry, chutz min hayayin. The exception is wine. She'al hayayin omer boreh peri ha'gefen. On wine, the person says, creator of the fruit of the vine. Now, interesting. Take a moment for a second. He says that on fruits of the tree, you make boreh peri ha'etz, except for wine. What does that mean? It means wine should have been what? Wine should have been ha'etz, right? Now, why would you say wine should be ha'etz? Wine is a squeezed liquid from a fruit, right? Squeezed liquids, juice, is typically shakol, right? So because of the importance of wine, because of the hashivut of wine, really wine should have maintained its beracha of boreh peri ha'etz. Then the rabbis elevated it a step up. Wine was so important in their eyes that they gave it its own beracha of boreh peri ha'gefen. That tells you, by the way, if a person accidentally made boreh peri ha'etz on wine, he fulfills his obligation. Because technically boreh peri ha'etz on wine makes sense. It's a proper statement. But the rabbis elevated it to boreh peri ha'gefen. On fruits of the ground, this means certain things that come from bushes or low-lying trees that die year in and year out and then regrow. So those things are boreh peri ha'adama, creator of the fruit of the ground. Chutz min hapat, with the exception of bread. Bread comes from wheat or barley, even though those trees die and are replanted, and therefore they should be boreh peri ha'adama. A person on bread makes hamotzi lechem min haaretz. He brings forth bread from the ground. On wheat and barley kernels that are raw, a person who chews them, he makes adama because they come from the ground. It could be sometimes depending on if it's cooked and how it's produced. If it's raw, then it's adama. If it's cooked or shelled or anything like that, then it's going to be mizonot. Even if it's baked. If it's shelled or raw, then it's baked, it's going to be boreh minei mizonot. It's usually, today, granola is shelled and cracked open and cut open, and it's all the things generally make boreh minei mizonot. It doesn't matter, it's still cooked, it's still... If you're chewing a raw kernel, it's adama, because it comes from the ground. If you make it into flour and you're eating flour raw, shakol. If it's cooked or baked in any way, then it's mizonot, and if it's turned into bread, then it's hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Ve'al hayirakot omer boreh peri ha'adama. On vegetables, he makes boreh peri ha'adama. There's a difference between vegetables and fruits of the ground. Vegetables are things that grow directly out of the ground, things like cucumbers, gourds, things like that. Fruits of the ground are things that grow on types of bushes and other trees that bananas is a good example, that end up dying, and then a person has to regrow them. That also is considered adama, but that's not called a vegetable, it's called a fruit of the tree. So there's differences that the Mishnah brings. On both of them, says Tanakama, you make boreh peri adama. But here's the difference. Rabbi Yehuda says, boreh minei deshaim. Rabbi Yehuda says, on these yirakot, you make creator of the species of grass, of deshaim, which means, as Rabbeinu Ovadia explains it, he says, Lefi sheyesh bichlal peri ha'adama deshe. Among the fruits of the ground, there are different categories. There's deshe, grass-like things, uzra'im, and seeds like kitniyot, legumes, beans, things like that. And then there's also vegetables. So according to the Yehuda, you could divide things that come from the ground into three different categories: vegetables, fruits, and seeds, and zira'im. So the Yehuda says you got to make on each category its own beracha. So he says the Yehuda ba'ehekir. The Yehuda requires a recognition of the difference between these things, and he says that if you're going to make on vegetables, you're going to make boreh peri ha'adama, but on seeds, you're going to make boreh minei zira'im, creator of these types of seeds, and on the grass-like things, you're going to make boreh minei deshaim, creator of the different grasses. So the Yehuda requires us to be more specific about the category of thing that comes from the ground and to make a unique beracha on that category. Tanna Kama does not. He says anything that comes from the ground is just borei peri hadama. We make borei peri hadama on everything, and that's the halacha. Correct. You didn't hear about them because they're not the halacha. The halacha is we just say borei peri hadama on everything. One last point that Bartenura brings here, and then we'll close. He says on anything that you're going to make borei peri ha'etz or borei peri hadama, it has to be eaten in its normal fashion. So if its way is to eat it raw, then you eat it raw, you make the beracha. If its way is to eat it cooked, and you eat it cooked, you make that beracha. If it gets eaten raw or cooked, then you make its beracha. But let's say I take something that's normally eaten raw and I cook it. I take a cucumber and I cook it. Cucumbers are normally eaten raw. And I cook it, it goes down to shakol, and vice versa. If I take something that's normally cooked, like a potato, and I eat it raw, then it's going to be shakol yavet varo, because I'm eating it in an unorthodox, weird fashion. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.